Dr. David Schein, welcome to the Kino Isaac podcast. How are
Well,
you?
it's great to see you again, and as you know, I have been to your beautiful city and your beautiful country about 3 years ago, and unfortunately, we didn't know each other then, or we could have met in person. And
Yeah,
I'm delighted to have a chance to chat with you.
I'm delighted. I am so grateful that you got so much patience. For the listeners who are wondering why I'm smiling, David and I have been having some technological issues since Thursday. We had a phenomenal conversation with regards to his book, which is called Bad Deal for America. And I started off on Thursday saying, okay, let me mention the book first, which I don't normally do, until 30 minutes into the show, because this is going to give listeners an idea of what the show is about. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what the show is about. We touched on politics in the US, politics in South Africa, global politics. And unfortunately, due to a number of sites, including Amazon Web Services, Google being down, we lost the recording. And then we come on to record today, which I'm grateful for that you were available at such short notice. I know Rachel also said, it's not rare that David is so free over the weekend. I tried to attempt to come on to StreamYard again, and we had issues. We had issues. Now we are using David's Zoom, which I'm so grateful for. David, thank you for thinking of that, in the moment. And we started the podcast so late, but look, we're going to make the best of it. We're going to push, for an hour, even if we can do 45 minutes, because I don't want to keep you waiting, that will be perfect. But this is such a critical conversation, as I said on the email, like, it's the best till date, the best political discussion I've had ever in my life, from people locally, internationally. It's the best ever. So let's make the best of it. So, David,
Sure.
I mean, we went down so many avenues. So it's crazy. And now let me start off just like how I started off on Thursday, by just saying, from where I'm sitting in South Africa, when I was growing up, I was lost, I was confused, I don't know which direction to go with my life. And one day I turned on the TV, a local station based in South Africa. For the South African listeners, it was called SABC3 at the time. And I tuned in and I came across a show that was called The Apprentice. And the host of the show is now the president of the United States, Donald Trump. And at the time, he wasn't involved. Okay, he was here and there, but I didn't know, still being in high school at the time, I never know that he would one day become, two times the president of the United States. But what I gathered from that show changed my whole life, the whole dynamic of what Kino could become. And from then, whenever I needed direction, it was look at what America is doing, from the music industry to politics. And I look at my life now, from my music, from my record label, from my coaches, it's all linked back to America. So for that, I am grateful for. I feel at times like I am more passionate about America, from politics to the music industry, than I am about my own country. And I know there's times I post a lot, or I comment about America, and it's always positive, and someone will come along and say, but you're not even based in America. Like, why are you even commenting? I'm like, that's where I get direction. And that's where countries, that's where economies get direction. Whether you know it, whether you want to believe it or not, that is where we get direction. You know, so it's great to have this sort of conversation. But I mean, we can start off, David, with your history. Let's get on to your book, which I mean, is everything that we talk about anyway. And we take the conversation from there.
Well, it's a delight to be here and to meet you. Again, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in person previously. And
Yeah.
I'm basically a lifelong conservative. My father, who was not necessarily conservative, was what we call a career military person. He was an enlisted man in the United States Navy for almost 29 years, which meant my entire childhood uh, we were under the shadow of the military, even though I was not in the military and did not serve in the military. I'm the oldest of seven children. We grew up in very, very modest development. My mother had what's called a GED, a certificate that said she had the equivalent of a high school degree. She was ill and was not able to finish high school. My father did finish high school, but in growing up, my parents really emphasized education. They were not very political. My mother was a traditional Democrat because Catholics at the time were Democrats. My father was famously an independent. And so, with those modest beginnings, the main focus was my parents emphasized over and over and over again: work hard in school, go to college, work hard in school, go to college. And that was the big direction that I had. And it concerns me today because there's a lot of criticism of colleges in the United States today. A lot of the media, a lot of the social media, and I'm very active on the social media, just say, "Oh, college sucks. It's not worth it. It's a terrible thing." And as someone who can testify that by pursuing education, that not just myself, but my sisters and brothers and my children and my grandchildren, hopefully my grandchildren who are still fairly young, will enjoy the benefits of making the investment. And you don't have to go to college, but in the United States today, here in Houston, where it's very warm, air conditioning technicians are in huge demand, plumbers and electricians, and they make in U.S. Salaries, they make $80,000 a year and up. Those are not trivial numbers, and that's without a college degree, but with a reasonable investment in technological education. So I'm a big fan of people making that investment in themselves, either that. But in any event, in my case, I actually ended up getting four degrees. I worked hard in high school. I won a scholarship to an Ivy League college. And of course, the Ivy League is under tremendous criticism today for having become what we call woke, or just disconnected from the reality of life. Basically, somebody asked me what woke means. Well, to me, woke means you don't understand day-to-day human beings in the United States, that people have to show up, go to work, and make a living every day, and disconnected from day-to-day reality that the rest of us face. But I was at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Famously, their president was forced to resign, I guess, about a year ago due to extreme anti-Semitism. And I find that incredibly ironic because when I was a student there 50 years ago, unbelievably, I know I look much younger, is the UPenn campus was one of the most positive places in America for Jewish students. There was a very large percentage of Jewish students. There was very active Hillel on campus. The two gentlemen across the hall from me, my freshman dorm, were both active with Hillel. They went and ate dinner at the Hillel every night while they were students. And so to see, but I did see the beginnings of what has happened. I did see in the social sciences and things and the activity on campus this descent into madness, as somebody has referred to. And so I did get a chance to see that. In any event, I started in the sciences. I was going to be a doctor. That didn't happen for me. I realized that I didn't like working with sick people. My joke is that I would be a wonderful doctor if I didn't have to work on sick people. And so I went in a different direction. Radio is something that saved me. I became involved. The University of Pennsylvania had an FM station that was, many colleges have an AM station that broadcasts in the dorms, just as Penn did, but they also had an FM station that was a public radio station, broadcast throughout the greater Philadelphia area and into South Jersey, and had a good following. And I ended up with a weekly 1 hour show on the arts. And the show did well enough that in about a year and a quarter into that, the regular public radio network which some people refer to as PBS or NPR, called me up and said, hey, would you like to bring your show over to our network? And so that was a tremendous opportunity for me because I was able to get theater tickets and things like that. I was covering the arts. But when I had the badge, if you will, of the public radio station, I had access to everything. And just as if I was working for the big newspapers downtown or one of the other television stations. So I had a tremendous opportunity to meet many famous performers. I'm not going to mention the names because most of your audience wouldn't recognize them today because it was the stars of 50 years ago. But it was a very significant opportunity. And, I'm 19 years old and I'm
Yeah.
meeting these world famous performers and people who are on television and things. And in any event, I that morphed into an arts management business. And I had a diverse crew. My arts director was an African American man, about 22 years my senior. And I had a woman who was about a decade older than me, and she was my music director. And we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of good things. We helped a lot of bands and performers and artists get exposure. And then I kind of hit a wall. I was invited to attend a top MBA program at the University of Virginia Darden School, and they said, hey, we're impressed with you. Your grades aren't that good, but you did good on the standardized exam. And we're really fascinated by somebody who can create a business out of their apartment and, do all the things that you did. And so I put, got rid of everything that I was involved in and went to Charlottesville, which is kind of a rural area. It's like going out to the woods for a city person like me, and worked on my MBA and did well. And I realized that I had kind of an orientation toward law. And so I got an invitation to move to Houston, Texas from Virginia, and got my law degree at the University of Houston, which is a big public university here in Houston and a very fine law school. And then was involved with the law for many years and as corporate and then in private practice. And at about 25 years in, I said, you know what? I think I need to give back. I need to be involved in education because education has helped me move past the very, very modest start that I had in life. And so I went back to school, happened to be back to the University of Virginia, back to the woods, and earned a PhD in management and have been involved primarily full time as a in higher education as a professor, but it gave me the background in the education to write books, scholarly books. And so the next thing I know is I've got two books out on what I call political management, and they're bipartisan. They take a negative view of both dominant political parties in the United States, and the question became, how do you promote your book? It's no fun to write a book. I mean, writing a book can be catharsis. If people can write diaries, like you and I,
Yeah.
many people write diary. So what? But it's much more fun if there are a lot of people reading your book. And
Yeah.
so, believe it or not, that's how I ended up being involved in webcasting, is because um, we needed to get an audience. And one of the public relations people I was introduced to said, well, why don't you and I do an interview together? And that's how my weekly show, Saving America, started. Didn't start as a weekly show. It just started, well, let's do this thing. And she realized, the lady who was coaching me said, we need to do this weekly to build an audience and all that. And that's what grew into the weekly 1 hour show that we're doing today. So it's been quite a path. Unfortunately, my webcasting is interfering in my current book, which is my first book that is the first two books, of course, are nonfiction and heavily researched. The current book is called A Cheap Education, and it's based on my college experience that I just detailed for you. And I got a better education on the streets of Philadelphia, creating my own business and working with rock bands and folk singers and things than I did in the classroom. Because
Yeah.
sometimes on the job training, OJT is more valuable, but the combination of classroom work plus that on the job training gave me a background which today, as a college professor and as a host of a show, that depth of background really helps me in terms of dealing with the rest of the world and presenting my view. So I hope that
Yeah.
wasn't too long an answer.
No, no, no. You can go on for as long as you want. I agree with you. If I also look at my own personal life, it's nothing that I learned, in the classroom itself. you know I did what I had to do. I went to primary school, I went to high school, I went to college. Not I did not want to go to a university. I was not going to spend 7 years of my life. I just wanted to get into the real world. And by being in the real world, you learn so much more. You know how to deal with it. I look at people who, you know in South Africa, went into tertiary education. They went to university, they've studied 7 or 10 years, but they can't deal with how the world is changing right now in 2025. You know, globally, they can't deal with failure. They can't deal with defeat. Because they never experienced that. Because all the school system taught us to do was to pass, 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 pass. So it's all we like psychologically, subconsciously know. But the moment we hit one roadblock, one failure, or you lose your job for whatever reason, like what happened throughout the COVID period, they're getting into depression, anxiety. They don't know how to deal with it. They're seeing a therapist, committing suicide. One of the podcasts I'm actually on as well is called Talking Back to Suicide. How many people are committing suicide because they've lost a job? They don't have a means of income because they don't know how to, like, you know, as Donald Trump said in one of his books as well, think like a champion, to think on their feet. They know how to think on their feet in the present moment in time. Okay, what can I do? What resources are available to me? What am I good at? How can I make this work for me? They never think like that. So I completely agree with you. Completely, 100%. I mean, do you agree with what I'm saying, like from a psychological standing
Yes.
point, with people?
Right, and you bring up an important issue about suicide and defeat, and I had an interesting situation. By the way, the gentleman who was my art director had such an enormous impact on my early life. Had been in the military. He was a very fine artist, and he was quite a character, a philosopher, if you will. And he and I worked with a small business operation. And the number is going to sound trivial today, but it was $200. And we had done the work without getting a deposit. So the organization did not have success. And they came back and they said, well, the material that you prepared for us under this $200 contract was not successful, so we're not going to pay you. And
Sure.
$200 was an enormous amount of money at that time. To give you an idea, rough estimate, $200 at that time would be equivalent to about $10,000 today. Because
Wow.
this is, well, you think about it, that was 50 years ago. Plus,
Yeah.
I was living on $10, $20 a week. So that was 10 weeks of food, and, stuff like that. And, but Al and I discussed it, and I told Al what had happened because I was the business person. I was the person interacting with this organization. And Al said to me, that is the cheapest education you'll ever get. So that's the inspiration for the title of the book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Al passed away about 4 years ago, and his 50-year partner, she passed away about a year later. The neat thing about artists and I think for musicians as well, is that in my office here in Houston, just a few feet away from where I am recording today, I have four paintings, large painting, nice paintings, not super large, but nice. Three by Al Walker and one by his partner, Ellen Streibel, so that I have this wonderful memory of them. And I also have, when I was late in college, Al did a profile of me, a very nice charcoal drawing, basically, and it's a pretty good size. It's probably 18 wide and 24 tall. And I have that on display in my university office. And my favorite question is because I had big, long, dark hair and a beard. And I say to my visitors in my university office, I say, who do you think that is? What do you think of that, artwork there? And hardly anybody ever guesses it's me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I wouldn't even guess now, But I mean, it happens a lot when you look at someone, how they looked in their 20s versus how they look in their 40s, 50s, like, yo, what's happening here? I was actually telling a friend of mine, I think it was yesterday, I look so different. Like, okay, I'm 36 years old at the moment, but because I never take proper good care of myself in my 20s, like in my early 20s, I looked older, versus how I look in my 30s, because it was around 24, 25. I was like, okay, I need to start taking care of myself, because I was walking through a shopping mall and they got like this health stand that was set up. So one of the nurses was like, can I please, I think it was a blood test. Yeah, it was a blood test. So they were just doing it, randomly for people who wanted to get a health check. And it was my sugar that was like extremely high. And she was like, okay, you need to start taking care of yourself or you're going to have a heart attack before 30. So I took that to heart, I really took that to heart. Ironically, my mother's a nurse, you know, but yeah, I was like, not even taking care of myself. And then I was like, okay, let me start exercising, eating correctly. And that's how I managed to look much more thinner, much more healthier, today versus, how I look then. So I can believe that. I just want to ask, out of curiosity, what law did you specialize in?
Well, being a business person, actually focused on tax law while I was my most of my law school career, and then at my very last semester of law school, I switched to employment law and labor law, which is a distinct area of the law here in the United States. And so I have been an employment attorney and a business attorney for my entire career, but that wasn't where I actually started in law school. And so I review a lot of contracts for businesses, and but my primary area is to coach businesses on how to deal with employees. And turning back to politics, of course, and talking about The Apprentice, as a professional in employment law, that show drove me crazy. And that was my first time knowing who Donald Trump was. I don't know that I knew who Donald Trump was before the TV show The Apprentice. And when he would say, "You're fired," it was very disturbing to me because that is not what we professionals coach managers to do. We want managers. And I actually, believe it or not, I still have a small part-time law practice with various businesses, and I coached a manager yesterday, Thursday morning, about firing somebody who reported to him. Very unfortunate. The fellow just didn't meet the needs of the job, and they had given him many, many chances, and they were going to have to sit down and have that discussion. And I tell my students and I tell the people that I coach, one of the most difficult things that you will do in life is to terminate someone's employment. But
Mm.
certainly sitting there and saying you're fired is not what we coach, and a good way to get sued or have people come after you. Occasionally there are some very extreme situations. You mentioned suicide, and I was involved in a case so many years ago where there was a huge concern that the person might be suicidal. And so what we did is, fortunately, the management was aware of the fragility of the situation, and they contacted me. And what we did is we set up a situation where we had a counselor in one room. we I did not personally meet, but I set this up. The manager and another manager, so two managers met with the employee and explained it, briefly, maybe a 10-minute meeting, and said, here's the situation, here's why we need to let you go and all that. And then they walked him into the next room and had him sit down with a counselor so that there was no gap. He had, somebody went on his side basically as soon as he left the other office, and he recovered from that. I lost track of him, but as far as I know, he certainly did not commit suicide. So that was the positive
Yeah.
thing. And one of the things that you mentioned, which is part of the concern that we have today in talking about the woke education and the woke universities, is a lack of resilience of our young people, that they, sometimes, something doesn't go their way, or they get less than an A in a course and they have this mega meltdown. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, hey, you know what, guys? Life can deal you a lot of bad cards, and you've got to be resilient. You've got to face the fact that that's a nature of life. And it's interesting because you're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Many businesses do not succeed. And it's fascinating because they hear about this guy and he's a billionaire today. And they go back and check his record, and he had 10 business failures before he had, what I'm saying, before he had that successful business. And so if you didn't keep going and say, well, this one didn't work, but by golly, I had this great idea, I'm going to try this one next. If they don't do that, they're not going to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's from those failures you learn so much. I mean, wow. I can't even think of the amount of times, I failed, not even at business, but just in life in general. And you just kept going. And it wasn't picking up a textbook that maybe kept going. It was picking up a book, a autobiography about someone, and you read that book. I mean, I started a podcast because I was reading a book, Gary Vee. He's from New York, you know, and that was like, okay, let me start a podcast during this COVID area. And that's what's led me here now. But how many failures that I have, in just, getting the podcast going alone, how many weeks, week after week coming in and just doing the podcast alone based on what I was seeing, happening in the world, happening in the entertainment space. 3 years down the line, yeah, I got an opportunity now to interview guests. Someone saw it, was like, would you love to interview our guests? I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not? But failure is so important. I agree with you. I mean, there was once upon a time in South Africa, it was around 2008, 2009. At the time, President Jacob Zuma, was in power, and then they decided to do, free education, but it did not work out long term. Of course, there's still free education available. Don't think you're getting much out of that anyway. But, people were saying that people don't appreciate free, and that is why in South Africa, there's still this large majority that still feels so entitled. After 1994, I could understand why. I was still a kid at the time, when Nelson Mandela came into power. But I could understand why people felt entitled at that time. But now in 2025, if you still have this mentality of, they owe me, so I'm just going to take advantage of whatever I can for free, which a large majority still does in South Africa, you're not really learning what life is about, you know, because I'm entitled to that. I'm entitled to free education. But then you get the free education, but you make nothing of it anyway. You're still complaining. In South Africa, there's so much people that are still complaining. Oh no, I don't have this and I don't have that. Yeah, well, if you want it, you need to go out and you need to work for it. That's my mentality. It may not happen now, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to be grateful for what I currently have in my present moment in time. And if that's my goal, that's where I need to be. Okay, what do I need to do to get there? And then I'm going to start, dotting on that blueprint. You know, I'm going to start looking, okay, what can I read? What material can I consume? If I'm watching Netflix 24/7, that's not going to help me, you know. But I'm still entitled, because the government is going to give it to me. But that's why the government plays on your emotions all the time and always get away with so much fraud and corruption, pinpointing South Africa at this present moment in time, because they're giving you this, they're giving you that, you're content with it. You still want, okay, let me give you some, but they're not helping you. They're just keeping you
Yeah.
there.
Well,
You know?
I think it's a parallel observation to what we have in the United States because there a lot of people have you may have heard this. There's a crisis in the student loan situation, and many students, including myself and both of my sons, have borrowed money to attend college. I paid all of my loans off. Actually, paid them off early because I appreciated the opportunity. And bluntly, they were smaller numbers, but in proportion to the time, again, it was a very long time ago, that those numbers are still in proportion to what people incur in many schools. And there are 5 million Americans who are in default on their student loans as we speak
Oh,
today. And I am not sympathetic to that. And, people, there are various programs. One of my sons is a public high school teacher. There is a government program that says if you are involved in working in education in the public sector, you can apply for a certain level of loan relief. And he's apparently it's a much more complicated procedure than it sounds like, but he has done that and that helps him. He's now working on his PhD while teaching in high school. But I appreciate the opportunities that I was given. I appreciate the scholarships. I appreciate the federal loans. And I think that students are more careful in the United States selecting their education than because it's not free. However, it's a tiered system. Both of my sons did community college before going to university. The community colleges in the United States are very economical compared to the traditional universities, and it makes sense. So they did that. They both did well in their community college, and that helped them to go to a very good 4-year university. And they were very appreciative of the opportunity. And I expect both of them to fully pay off their student loans. But the students that have run around, and there was a time during the previous administration, the Biden administration, where people were running around saying, well, the government owes this to us. They should never have made them loans. They should have just given us the money. And so, we don't need to pay it back. And I'm not sympathetic to that because it's part of your responsibility if you didn't have to go to college. But it's interesting because we did have a generation, and this was sort of about the time that I started into higher ed, but not when I was still already full time, where a lot of students, large numbers of our undergraduate students, were majoring in communications. Well, communications degree will get you a good job at Starbucks, perhaps, but it's not going to get you a professional position because it's vague. And if you want to do English, that's great, but you need to be focused on the fact that you're not going to be a poet. You're going to be a high school English teacher or a grade school English teacher. And if you go in the sciences, a lot of the science programs do require an advanced degree. You have to be committed to that. And so what we're seeing in the United States is because it is not a free system, it's a reasonable system at many schools, is that the students are trending to be in the sciences or in the business school. About 25% of all United States students are in the business programs in their colleges. And that's good because we need those business people, and some of them will be managers in retail stores and things, but others will be involved with big corporations. Others will go on to get a master's in business and be consultants with these big international consulting firms. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. And of course, with AI being such a big deal, artificial intelligence, it's not a simple situation. You've got to have enough education to understand how to use AI to enhance what you do. And
Yeah.
it's a great tool, but I don't think it's going to replace the human beings, at least no time soon. Hopefully, it's going to become a very important aid to us humans, in various ways, and I'm hopeful of that. But it's kind of interesting. I did want to mention, by the way, that today in the United States, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we had these big riots in Los
Yeah.
Angeles, and this was ridiculous. The backstory on this is that there's a communist operation, and there's another whack operation that claims to be helping immigrants that got millions of dollars from the Biden administration, and which money basically flushed down the drain. And another operation is the public employee is SEIU, which is a union of mostly janitors and relatively low income trades. And the president of that was arrested for standing in front of a federal vehicle that was trying to leave the courthouse or something like that. So I'm sure he's out on the street again. But in any event, unfortunately, those protests in Los Angeles were turned violent, and we're well aware that the Trump administration sent federal troops out there, and that's caused the National Guard, and it's caused a big political kerfuffle. I'm not very sympathetic to violence, and I think that the Democrats who think that this is somehow they're going to paint Trump as this horrible, awful person and all this and sent these federal troops out there. I don't think they're very tuned in to the average American. The average American does not want to see their stores burned down, bricks thrown through windows of police cars. I mean, this is not how to win friends and influence people, as as the
Yeah.
cliche goes. And
Yeah.
so today is an odd day in America because we have protests called the No Kings Day. And of course, they accuse Trump of being a future dictator or king or whatever. And that's the significance of it. I am not a fan of what's happening today. First of all, today is Flag Day in the United States. We're recording on June 14th. But and I think that's wonderful, and we should all, proud Americans display our American flag correctly, of course. But the the thing is that Trump it's his birthday today. He turned 79 today, and they having this huge parade in Washington, D.C. of traditional armaments, tanks and trucks and whatever. And it's the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. So that supposedly is the reason for the parade. It's just coincidental that it's his birthday, of course.
I
And
saw a
but
statement from him. Sorry, before you continue, I saw a statement from him also saying the same thing. He's like, you know what, it's Flag Day, and that is why we are, celebrating, 250 years.
right.
And it's just these haters, of course, you don't use the word haters, that are just using the fact that it's also his birthday against him.
Oh yeah, no, it's unfortunate, but I understand that the estimated cost of this thing is like 138 million dollars because they're
Yeah.
bringing the resources in and having the police patrols and all that. And given that the country is deeply in debt, I would rather have had them do it on days when there were already going to be a parade. Memorial Day, which was the last Monday in May, July 4th, which is just a few weeks away. I would rather have had them use some of these resources on those and not done anything today other than to say, hey, this is a fantastic opportunity. Maybe have Trump make an appearance at a U.S. Army base and shake hands with the troops and things like that. So I'm kind of in that middle category of a lot of the goals of the Trump administration are positive goals. The mechanism for getting it done have not been very helpful. I do agree with the ICE arrests of criminals. And in Los Angeles, I just before we began recording today, went through the list of some of the people that they arrested in Los Angeles. Double murderer, child rapist, child pornography, beating your wife, discharging a firearm in a house. I mean, these are bad people. The citizens should be saying, yes, get those people off our streets, get them in a jail cell, and then get them out of our country. And so these protests do not make a lot of sense to the average citizen. I think some of the protesters are simply misinformed. They simply misunderstand. They don't really have enough background to know about why this is going on, but also the backstory that a lot of this is being manipulated by political enemies, by communists. And I've never really understood why anyone supports communism. It is the single largest cause of murder and death in the world over the last 100 years. It's almost exactly 100 years. You know, the Bolshevik Revolution happened in Russia in 1917. That bloody, awful, terrible thing. Russia has suffered under communist domination for many years. It looked like they were going to break free when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1990, but they didn't come up with a solid Democrat format, and they've allowed this deranged killer, murderer, Putin, to take over the country. And it's a great shame. And I have a personal friend who's from Russia. She's here in the United States and is a lovely person. Is a translator, by the way. And her husband was originally from Egypt, a very interesting couple and classic American, you know, somebody from Russia, somebody born in Egypt, both of them educated here in the United States, both, you know, productive parts of the society, contributing to this tremendous diversity that makes it such a cool place here. And I think part of America's success is this diversity, is we've got all these people from all over the world come here and work together, hopefully work together. But in contrast, communism hasn't produced a positive result. I mean, it's sold as this utopian outcome, but it doesn't work. Cuba is miserable. Venezuela is miserable. Russia is declining because of the attempt to reimpose communism. The CCP is at odds with its own people in China. I have direct contacts with people from China, and the only reason I see that Z and the CCP can even run the country, and it's so gigantic, 1.4 billion people, is that the Chinese people are so different than the American people. We're so involved in politics. Everybody, you know, there's hardly a person on the street in America that you don't talk to who will tell you, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm an independent. This is who I like, this is who I don't like. That's not like it in China. Those people, it's a very different culture. And so I think if it was a different culture, they would have gotten rid of Z and the CCP a long time ago. I mean, look at their you know, have imprisoned and stole organs from members of a particular religious sect, and they've gone after people. And it's so unfortunate that those type of things are happening. And yet we've got part of the organizers of this big protest in Los Angeles is a communist operation. It's the name of it. I mean, the name, it's like communist and social
Yeah.
just, yeah, you know, I mean, I'm not making this up. It's one of the three groups that's putting this thing together out there. And it's like, okay, why would you want that as opposed to this? And it's, hey, you know what? Democracy is messy. You know, you're going to have people don't agree with each other. You're going to have, you know, contested elections. You're going to have this and that and the other thing. It's messy, but consider the alternative. And I don't have a better alternative. And you know, but in any event, it's a very dynamic day in America because of these No Kings demonstrations. I am hopeful that they will not be violent. I can tell you that in Texas, where I am, and Texas and Florida tend to be very parallel states. They're the two most popular states. A lot of people are moving to both states, and both states have Republican governors and very tough law and order approaches. The governor of Texas and many of the sheriffs and the police officers said, get out of line. You're in a jail cell before you know it. So keep that in mind. We're not California. We're not going to let that happen here. Heard exactly the same thing as something that made the national news is there's a sheriff in Broward County, and I saw it on my LinkedIn feed already, but I think he said it last night or he said it early this morning. But the sheriff in Broward County said, basically, if you you block a street, you're going to be in a jail cell. You do this, you're going to be in a jail cell. And then he said, you point a gun at a police officer, make sure your family will let your family know where to pick up your body.
Sure.
He said
Sure.
that point blank as
Yeah.
a sheriff in Broward County. Broward County is down towards not quite to Miami, but it's down in the general Miami area. I think it's near Fort Lauderdale. But it's just very interesting to see the contrast from the governor of California and the crackpot mayor of California, Karen Bass, saying all these anti-police things and Trump's bad because he sent troops in here to settle down and prevent a big riots and all that. And the Republicans have a very strong case because we have seen in the last 5 years the George Floyd riots that have destroyed Minneapolis, riots in Seattle that have destroyed a beautiful city. Seattle, a great city to visit. I would not visit Seattle today. I won't visit Minneapolis today. I will not visit Portland, Oregon today because these cities have defunded their police departments and have allowed this dangerous element to run around and threaten people. And I'm sure you feel the same way where you are. And again, I've been to Johannesburg. I felt very safe there. Um, traveled around a bit and very, very much enjoyed being there. But part of enjoying a beautiful place is that you feel safe. And I
Yeah.
don't know how having violent riots makes you feel safe.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, sure, there's so many questions to ask, and each time I'm looking at the time, I'm thinking, do we even have that time to get through it? Like, just to touch on, when you visited South Africa, okay, if I look at growing up during the Mandela administration, Mbeki administration, and what I told you on Thursday, and we had a laugh about it, even though Jacob Zuma could not read, he could not put numbers together. He fell asleep in parliament. you know, Things were still, in my opinion, much more safer compared to, the Ramaphosa administration currently in South Africa. Walking through Johannesburg now, the chances of getting out, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's it's a risk. It's a huge risk. That's unfortunately the situation at the moment. We got kidnappings, of businessmen, of not too much politicians, that I know of, but businessmen, it's on a rise. Where they're literally walking into your office or into your business, they are taking you out and they are telling your family, look, this is how much we want for you back. So I can't say that it's safe at the moment. It's not entirely safe. Like if you have to come back, depending also on which areas you are as well. You go to. So I'm just putting it out there. Like I'm also open about how I see it. Is what it is. With regards to what you said about misinformation, like so I'm following like different people in the lead up now since all the riots started in Los Angeles till today. um I'm following a lot of people, and a lot of people that I got a good relationship with them. I don't discuss politics unless you bring it up, but I'm not biased about it. I will listen to you. I will listen to you, and that's cool. You two want to fight with each other, that's on you. I'm still friends with you both. So I see a lot of them posting, and there's also an artist, that we've connected also on the podcast. We've kept our relationship going. She's also in Los Angeles, and she's like, I'm not going to mention names, but she's anti-Trump. She is stating and she is posting that, besides all the criminals that we're taking out of the street, I'll get your opinion on it as well. We're also taking a lot of innocent people off the street that have contributed to the growth of America. So that's their argument, you know.
Yes.
That's their argument. So we're taking, people who are doing an honest day's work. We're taking them off the street, we're putting them in a cell, we're taking kids away from the parents, and that shouldn't be allowed as well, in the land of the free, as I've seen online. So there's those sort of stuff that's also happening in the mix of this. And I think when it comes to, the word misinformation, there's a lot of misinformation on both ends. When
Oh,
I look
yes.
at it now as like an
Yes.
outsider. So what's your take on that? As the
Well,
Trump administration gone overboard, as in taking, hardworking people just because maybe they from a different country, and we're also taking criminals and we're just mixing the two together and we're saying, okay, yeah, no, we've arrested a bunch of criminals.
Well, again, you have to consider who you're talking with because I'm a hardcore conservative. I'm only third generation American, by the way. So, my ancestors came here, around 1900, 1920s and 30s, and they came here legally. They had to pass a health check to get through Ellis Island and in New York Harbor and places like that. And I am a very big advocate of legal immigration. I would like to see much more liberal policies in getting more and more qualified people. But I want people to come to our country legally and to be screened so that we don't have Tren de Agua and MS-13 and some of these elements coming into our country. I mean, it was certainly a fact. It was not a mystery. It was a fact that TDA took over an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. What they would do is they found a vacant unit or something, and they went in there and set up camp. And then they would go and threaten the other people that were legitimate tenants of the apartment complex, and they would be scared and they would move out, and then they would take over those units. So it was a very scary situation in Aurora. Far as I know, that has now been cleaned up, but I do not understand why the local police, a couple weeks into that, didn't just go arrest those guys and put them in jail, and after a long jail term, release them back, ship them back to wherever they came from. Tren de Agua is, of course, from Venezuela. MS-13 is from Mexico.
Yeah.
And hopefully they would have learned something in that time period. So part of it is lax police enforcement. And to be fair with the police, we have politicized our criminal justice system. So you've probably heard of George Soros, who is he's here in the United States. He's apparently come from, I believe, from Greece originally. And I'm not sure, I guess he bought his way in here or something. I don't know how he came to the United States. And I don't know why he came here because he hates the United States. And he has funded these anti-justice people in many major American cities, including Los Angeles and New York. He has these, what we call Soros-funded district attorneys who are releasing criminals without prosecution or with very light sentences. And there's been this no cash bond situation where we've got people commit murder and are let back out on the street. And they said, oh, we put a monitoring collar on the guy's leg. Well, those haven't prevented additional murders. It's just where they were when they committed the murder if they haven't cut the monitor off. So we've created some very, very dangerous situations in the United States. It generally tends to be in what you might call the anti-Trump movement in this country or that. And there's a lot of misinformation about immigration. First of all, most immigrants of this wave that came in under Biden, and you're going to hear all sorts of numbers. I think the accurate number is 8 to 10 million. You're going to hear 20 million. I heard somebody on the other day say 40 million. It's not that. There might be in total in the United States 20 million people who do not have the correct paperwork. But of the wave that came in relatively recently, it's 8 to 10 million. And remember, a lot of those people paid the cartels in Mexico to get here. And unfortunately, most of them didn't pay to get here to be doctors, nurses, and air conditioning technicians. So
Add value.
this Right. So this myth that these people are being ripped out of their workplaces, the United States has spent in billions and billions and billions of dollars hosting these people because they have to have a place to live, they have to have food, the children have to go to school. And so the vast majority of these folks are not productively committed to our society. Many of them do not have skills or have negative skills. They're criminals. They came here for because they see us as not properly enforcing our police department, especially in big cities with Soros-funded district attorneys. So I think it is very, very important that we get control of the system. So I don't mind people being deported. However, the blunt reality is, and I was on a podcast yesterday that's airing today, that they're going to have come up with a system because if people pass a background check and have legitimate reason to be here, we need farm workers, we need people, we need nurses. The society needs people. So I think that they're going to have to come up with compromise. And by the way, Trump just in the last couple of days actually said something regarding making accommodations for farm workers. But one of the things I
Yeah.
pointed out is that we've had a guest farm worker program in place in the United States for 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, it's there. Now there are rules for it. I'd like to see those rules liberalized. And I think what Trump said is going to be a keynote to that. So if people are productively working, they're not committing crime, we can put some type of a pathway together for them. I think you're going to see that happen over the next 4 to 6 months. And I think that's a critical thing because, again, it's expensive to deport people, and not every country in the world is taking people back. So I think we're going to have to come up with what I call, pardon the Latin word, bifurcated process. We're going to have, hey, you're a criminal, you're over here, you're going to go to jail, and then we're going to ship you out of the country. You've got some promise. Let's talk, let's put you in the community, and let's get going and get you on a path to citizenship. So I think there's going to be a more creative solution in here. At least that's my hope as an American, that we can be more productive. And you never know. I think that's it's a necessity. It's not like it's optional because
Yeah, yeah.
you've got so many millions of people, and we do need workers. But we have very targeted needs. We're running out of truck drivers. Driving a truck, especially over the road, can be a very lonely job. You don't come home every night. You get on the road, you drive the truck. These big trucks. I don't even like driving a big van, much less these giant 18-wheelers. But there's a lot of opportunities like that, but people have to have the training to do that and the patience to do it. So I'm hoping that we're going to sort this thing out. And I don't think these protests, by the way, are going to help a bit. I think it's the wrong direction. It's the wrong thing that they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Man, look, I got like tremendous faith, that stuff like that does get sorted out.
Yes.
I get what you're saying about, illegal immigrants. And if we look globally, it is a mess. I got a friend that does visas as well, and he was telling me it's become so hard to get into France at the moment because illegal immigration has just become a mess. He says if you have to look at Paris at the moment, it is out of control. They have
Yes.
become so, so strict. If you are traveling from South Africa to France, they want your bank details, they want your business history. If you apply for a visa to go to the States, for example, you have to show your itinerary. Okay, my flights, this is my date that I want to go. I'm coming back. This is where I intend to stay, but you don't have to pay up front. Whereas now going to France, now they want you to pay up front. The embassy is actually calling the hotel to ensure that, okay, is this booked? Was it paid? So globally, there needs
Wow.
to be, yeah, measures in place. And for me, and looking at, the US as a leader, hopefully that same creativity that you are talking about, gets like just done all around the world, because that solution is just needed. You don't really hear about situations happening, like a few small Asian countries. I don't really hear about it happening like in Australia, in New Zealand, So we need to look at, okay, why don't we hear a lot about it on their end of the world, but we hear about it on this end? I mean, even in South Africa as well, it's out of control with the African countries, coming down. So we need to have that discussion. Okay, how do we control this? It's not that America is saying don't come in. And I recall Trump also saying this once upon a time, that look, he's not saying don't come to America. He's saying come in the right way.
Absolutely.
I do
Absolutely.
recall
And for
that.
the,
I
yeah.
agree with you. They have mentioned it before. It's just a matter about, as you said, who you're listening to. I mean, we look at, this whole mess that happened between US and South Africa, over the last months, and
Oh, that's
caused
quite
this
sad.
whole,
Yes.
yeah, call this whole, I won't say it went to the extent of riots, but now, oh no, why is America only letting in, Afrikaner farmers, you know? And then
Yeah.
that became now an issue, like in South Africa, and then
And
it's
it's an
okay,
issue in
yeah.
the United States too. It's it's
You
it's
see,
because
so we have
it's
to,
perceived
I
as
think,
racial discrimination by
yeah,
the
yeah.
black
So
community in America. So that's turned into a real public relations mess. And those are the kind of, I mean, there were only 40 people, is my understanding. There's 40 people that were allowed in under
yeah,
this program. And why not have just had them apply through normal immigration channels? Nobody would have cared, but it made a very negative headline. And like I said, the U.S. African American community said, well, here, Trump is favoring white people over black people, and it's a really bad thing. And the Republicans traditionally are not the world's best politicians, and that's a classic example of how you give a failed party. I mean, the Democrats are in the dumpster. You give them a little flag to wave that maybe they dig their way out of the trenches, and so really poor thing there. Well, I'll tell you what, I am going to need to go get some work done here, and
yeah,
I'm bet you've got some other
yeah.
guests hopefully coming up.
I mean, David, when it comes to politics, there is no full stop. When it comes
Yes.
to the world and what's happening globally, there is no full stop. We could go on and on and on about the conversation. But look, once again, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, even though I don't have the recording, was out of our control. We don't have the recording
Yes.
from Thursday, but it was great to have that conversation because it
Yes.
also opens up my mind. It opens up the mind of listeners, hopefully, hopefully, because I want people to be open minded. Yeah, before you call someone a racist, understand, what's happening, get the full picture of the story. Don't get emotional about it. If there's anything that people can take away, David, before we leave, where can people find Bad Deal for America? Where can they find you online? Because I'll also be sharing this within the description.
I'm very happy to share with the audience. My books are on Amazon. Bad Deal for America has a fascinating audio version, which people might find kind of fun to listen to, and it's available in Kindle format, electronic format, as well as in paperback. And my earlier book is still available also on Amazon and in Kindle or electronic format. And my personal website is my consulting firm, World Wide Web, ClaremontManagementGroup.com. And so I'm delighted to always hear from your listeners. And I'm very active on all the major social media platforms.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all the information, and thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure. It's really been a pleasure. And I hope, down the line,